Hi, Margot. How are you today?
Oh, I'm great. Thanks for having me here.
Well, it's great. Well, I'd like to know more about what you do. I understand that you're a geriatric care manager. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so I have a company called Montclair Elder Services based in Oakland, serving the Greater Bay Area. And as a geriatric care manager, I work with families and their loved ones who are mostly frail elders who are struggling around complex care issues. And those care issues can vary, but I support those families by creating support systems. I do in-person home visits. I work with the families to set up systems of care that create the best quality of life and improve communication for the family as well, to ensure that everybody is getting what they need when they need it.
Do you actually connect with other services for the people who employ you?
Yes, so people come and who need my support and help. I find out exactly what they need, and we work together on a plan of care. And I put those components together to ensure they get the care they need. Complex Meeting the needs of clients can often be complex and have multiple parts to them and follow up. And I do all of that for the client to ensure that there's no drop in care and follow through.
Well, that sounds great. Can you tell me, does the service that you offer cost money?
That's a great question. Yes, it does. At this time, geriatric care managers are paid mostly privately, and that's how I get paid, directly by the family. And all of care managers can get paid in a number of different ways for services, hourly or set rates.
I see. Is there any point at a person's progression of a disease that they tend to employ you?
So that can really vary. Often it depends on when the families need more support. Most of my clients are at the point where they have a lot of burnout and frustration and they're tired. For some, diseases, it can be a very long road, and families, spouses, or the client themselves can often just need extra support and guidance, just from a professional who they know can walk in the door and immediately understand what they're going through, immediately identify and understand the support they're getting, and what they can be given, and really have an understanding of how they can take next steps, without being involved as a family member, but just as a professional.
Now, have you had any experience working with people who have Parkinson's disease?
I've had quite a bit. So professionally, my background, I have a master's in gerontology and from San Francisco State University. And I'm also a licensed nursing home administrator. So I ran nursing homes for about 15 years as a licensed nursing home administrator in the state of California. And all of my experience has been in the Bay Area. And a lot of folks with Parkinson's end up needing at some point at least a short-term stay for rehab services. And so over the years, I worked with a lot of folks who had Parkinson's.
Are there any points at which you say, I can't help you?
I give suggestions and direction, and families need to decide their next steps. So I find that families are most successful when they're the most receptive and engaged with care. There are a lot of ways to care for a frail elder, or somebody who is very ill. And particularly speaking to Parkinson's, there are a lot of complex parts of the disease that are very specific and unique to Parkinson's. And knowing that and being able to direct care is a really important part of my job, and to support families to understand that it's not just one thing.
So does that mean that you work with families both providing in-home care or in assisted living situations?
I go wherever the client is. So I don't have folks come to my office. I go to the client. So if the client is in a nursing home, assisted living, independent living, maybe temporarily they're at the hospital or at their maybe an adult child's home or their home, I follow them. And that is also pretty normal for a geriatric care manager to go wherever the client is. Our goal is to make it as easy for them to work with us as possible. We want to be a benefit, not a burden.
All right, can you describe some scenarios that from your past, without mentioning names of people, where you've helped them make decisions and improve the quality of life of the people with Parkinson's?
Sure. So, oftentimes it can be hard to get diagnosed with Parkinson's. And, sometimes by the time people get their diagnosis, they're really struggling. They're kind of trying to figure out what their next steps are. Maybe they have some depression related to it, which is very normal when you get a significant diagnosis of any kind for any disease. And so one particular family I can think about, they got a couple of wrong diagnoses. And they're really not doing great at home, and there was a lot of depression. So just identifying ways the family could work better with their loved one, the ways they could identify they are not really successful living in the home anymore for a number of reasons. And it was probably a better choice to move to a assisted living facility that they knew other people had been at, had been there before, had family members there. And I supported them in that transition to living at that facility. And it was a short-term client. They went on to getting different, I just supported them through that transition.
Right. So what that means is that if there are people who are then looking for an assisted living home, thinking that this is the transition they need to make, that could also be an ideal time to contact you. Is that right?
That can be. I don't do placement. There are people who I work with who are specialists in placement. That being said, myself and any other geriatric care manager has probably been to most of the assisted living facilities in the area because we have clients there or we're familiar with them. But transition from home to any new environment, and that could be moving in maybe an in-law unit with an adult child. Leaving your home is a very stressful, very difficult decision and can create a lot of barriers for maybe meeting new people. Maybe you're living in a new community. It can create again, depression, which is very common. Anybody, even a young healthy person, when they move, it's very stressful to leave your home. And sometimes that means giving up personal items, giving up car keys because it's not an area you can drive in anymore or want to drive. Sometimes you have to give up a pet. Those are all really hard things, and families and clients often need more support at that time.
Well, it's not just the person who has Parkinson's, but the caregiver who may need support. Is that correct? And can you elaborate?
I think that's absolutely correct. I think that oftentimes we're so good at caring for the person who has Parkinson's that you'll see, that the person who's caring for them, maybe the spouse or sibling, is missing their own doctor's appointments, maybe not getting their own medications filled, or not going out with their own friends for, maybe, meeting up with their bridge club or going to a book club, simple basic activities that were very fulfilling, they'll start missing. And that can be challenging because that caregiver could then also feel very isolated and alone. And that's not what you want either.
You mentioned that there is a specialty of people who help place people in homes. Is that correct?
That's correct. They are called placement agents.
And what does the placement agent do, and how do they go about their decision-making process?
So a placement agent, the way they get paid is that they get a flat amount, generally it is, from whatever place that is they place a client. So if you're looking to use a placement agent, they don't charge you anything. And then they are experts in knowing what's available. Generally, they place for assisted living, memory care, boarding care. They generally don't do independent living, but they are specialists and they know the different options available, and that's just what they do. And they have relationships throughout the community. And sort of like a real estate agent, they'll drive you around and show you those options and introduce you to people. Now, wherever you choose to use or not use, that's your choice. But again, it's sort of like a real estate agent in the sense that you don't pay them, they get paid by wherever they are placed.
I see. Is there any role for an insurance company in either placement or geriatric care?
At this time, no. That being said, within a number of larger nonprofit organizations that support seniors, such as Center for Elder Independence or Unlock, they do have geriatric care managers, or they may call them geriatric social workers, on their staff to support them. So if you're using a benefit like a Center for Elder Independence, which you have to be part of and is generally for folks who have the way they operate is using Medicare and Medi-Cal, as they have what they call geriatric social workers, or I'm not sure if they call them care managers, but it's a similar benefit.
Would you ever help people find a neurologist or a physical therapist? Is that part of a geriatric care manager's job?
Yes, a geriatric care manager connects care as needed. So if, oftentimes those, there are always referrals. You go to the doctor and they refer. And so making sure that those referrals are in place and followed up on, and there's communication and advocacy for the client is a very important part of a geriatric care manager's job.
Is there a role for other agencies that would help people with their sense of community?
Yeah, for sure. I think that each person has their own care plan and their own needs. So some people have a very elaborate community around them. And that could be an online community. It could be through a religious organization, a nonprofit, such as yours, maybe a big care community through a support group. But I do connect people and make sure knowing really who they are as individual people. And that holistic approach of care includes the community. Knowing just having 3 phone calls a week for a person who maybe lives alone can make a big difference in somebody's daily mental health. Knowing there's somebody who could call you or you could call them, and just to talk to, not about medical needs, just about having somebody who just wants to see how you're doing or stop by for a cup of coffee, and it not being a medical care, just being a personal interest is really important.
It sounds like you're saying that you're part therapist in this.
Well, I think being a good listener is a really important part of this job. and hearing what people want and what they need. And that can change, right? So somebody who's at the very beginning of a disease process where they're able to live independently versus maybe they're towards the end and they need more end of life care. Their needs can really vary, but quality of life is a very, very important part of what I do, and making sure no matter what part of their disease process or where they're at in their life, that it's the best it possibly can be at that time.
One question that many older people have is this: is this due to Parkinson's, or is this condition that I'm experiencing due to old age?
Well, that's always good to know about your family and your family's background if you can. So it's good to know, how your dad was at your age. What were they doing? Is it normal for people in your family to have hip problems? Is it normal for people in your family to, be out and about more, being out walking or stay at home? Knowing your family and maybe even what your spouse needs, right? Or your partner. I think all of that can really vary. And I think anybody can have a bad day, or the weather pattern can really affect it. If you're no longer able to drive, getting out and about, maybe during the winter isn't going to happen as much. So I think it just varies, per person and what they need and what they want. And it does, the disease is a really important part of it, but it's understanding a big part of it, but not everything.
Parkinson's is labeled as a progressive neurodegenerative disease. Are there any insights that you have in working with people with Parkinson's?
I think that oftentimes I've seen that we're identifying a part of the disease a little later. So maybe we could have got a head start on it. So an example of that would be speech therapy. Oftentimes people with Parkinson's have issues around making themselves heard, getting their voice louder, really encouraging that. And I think if you're not able to speak or be heard, that also can go back to leading to depression, isolation. And I think that is one area I've seen that people are slow to respond to. And a speech therapist, and there's sometimes there's groups that meet to help around that. I know there's one in Berkeley that meets to really build up your voice, I think is a really important thing.
How do people get a hold of you?
So I have a website, montclairelderservices.com, and I have a contact me button there. People can call me. I always have my cell phone. I just use the cell phone, or they can email me, and I'm available. I set up for all new potential clients. I do a 30-minute intake that's complimentary to see if I'm the right fit. Maybe they want to. My background is as a nursing home administrator. Maybe they want somebody who's been a therapist or an RN. Most geriatric care managers are LCSWs or have a similar background to mine. So sometimes it's just making sure it's the right fit, and understanding if this is where they want to go for their next step.
My understanding is that there are no long-term contracts that they have to sign with you. Is that correct?
That's correct. I do have, after I do, if they're going to be a client, I do have a contract. There's no down payment. There's no expectation of ongoing. I bill as I go. And for some folks, financial resources are a really important part of that conversation, and identifying how I can be of most support, understanding that finances are a big focus. And other people find that having the support of a care manager is such a relief that compared to the costs of caregivers, doctors, medication, housing for maybe that person if it's at assisted living, are already so high that my costs aren't really prohibitive by any means.
Some people may find that they need a house cleaner or assistance around the house because they have limited functionality over the years. Do you help with that kind of thing?
Absolutely. And, I am a big fan of housekeepers, and people laugh when I say that. But the reason is it's really hard to get used to having people in your house, particularly giving you personal care. It's not a natural thing to have a stranger give you a bath, or help prepare your food, or whatever it may, help change your clothes. So I think a housekeeper is a really good beginner first step. Having a housekeeper who comes in and also does your laundry or does your ironing, maybe prepares a meal for you or helps take in your groceries, do a little bit more. I always say that housekeepers don't just have to mop and run out the door. It's a great beginner relationship and can be also a very affordable one for people.
How do you vet a housekeeper? Because these days people are concerned about what people know, their background, their medical ability or ability to deal with medical issues, etc. How do you vet these housekeepers?
Well, oftentimes I'll ask them if they have a friend who has a housekeeper who they can recommend. That's the best starting point, is to say, send an email or ask your friends, hey, do you know somebody who has a housekeeper? And ask them what they like about them. Ask them what they don't like about them. If, you want to support a housekeeper who maybe has a small child who has to bring a child with her, but could be a more reliable housekeeper and maybe do a little bit more. Again, like do the laundry or empty the dishwasher or just do a few more tasks that maybe a normal housekeeper would do. And I also think that you're going to be home when they're there and you need to be able to communicate with them. So if you speak Spanish and they speak Spanish, fantastic. If they speak Russian and you speak Russian, whatever the language may be. Oftentimes housekeepers are new immigrants. It's a great entry-level job for many people. It has flexible hours, particularly for young mothers. I think that's a good start. Most people do not background check a housekeeper.
Now, some people live alone with Parkinson's. We'll call them flying solo. Mm-hmm. Other people live with caregivers. Are there any differences in how you might serve either of those two general populations?
Well, I think when somebody lives alone, it's really good to see how they support themselves. I always like to find out, who are they going to call in an emergency, and who are they going to call if they just can't make it to get dinner tonight and they need something to eat? What does that support network look like? Oftentimes, people who live by themselves have a better support network because they have to. And oftentimes people who live by themselves have lived by themselves a very long time, and they're used to being independent and setting systems up. So when people live with somebody else, it's important to know how much they rely on that other person, and not to make any assumptions about those relationships. Sometimes people live together, and I've found this quite a bit, who are it's a husband and wife, or have a relationship, maybe a long-term partner of some kind. Or maybe long-term friends or siblings. As they've aged, they've moved in together, but it's not an equal relationship. Sometimes one does more at different times, or one financially supports the other. So it's important to understand how that relationship works and what both of them need, so it's a successful partnership, and I can support that as well.
So when you talk to people that are in relationships, do you talk to both of them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Generally, it's the caregiver who's calling me and getting the initial information. I like to find out their perspective, but often their perspective is very different from the client themselves who I'm arranging support and care for. So sometimes the caregiver just needs somebody to talk to or somebody to hand things over to.
In these days of telemedicine and Zoom, many people meet online. Do you have a preferred method or do you mix and match?
I asked to meet people in person. I've been fully vaccinated for quite a while as a healthcare worker, but I will wear 2 masks if they want me to. I will wear one. I'll meet outside. It's really important for me to meet people in person to really see, maybe they're walking with a front wheel walker or cane. Maybe when I walk in the door and meet somebody, it's really important to see what their home is like. And maybe I could help them there as well. Bring in, or, sometimes what a care manager does is hire a maintenance person to install proper bars in the bathroom that they didn't know they needed, or eliminate some of the fall issues in their home, because or identify some areas where they could have a better quality of life for improvements to the home. And I coordinate those things as well.
Excellent. Well, you've given us a really holistic picture of what you do as a care manager. Thank you very much, Margot.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this time with you.
I think this fills a hole in our service and offerings to our clientele, to our members. Because we do support groups, we do educational services, but I think it's very important to be able to connect people to professionals in the field that can help them through difficult periods,
right?
Especially in decision making.
Well, oftentimes I have a little joke where I say that I always know it's my client if their hair's on fire. Because people are coming to me because they've generally done everything else they know to do and they're just tired and need help. They just want to hand everything over and be like, you do it.